Hello and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learning. I'm delighted today to be joined by Nicky Heathcote. Nicky is the chair of a Conveyancing Association, a non-executive director at PEXA, and you can explain what that is in a minute, and also of the chair of a Property Code Compliance Board as well. Loads of chairs. Nicky, thanks very much for joining me. How are you today?
All right, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
No, that's great. Right. So let's just start with conveyancing. So, chair of a conveyancing association, what do you do as part of being a chair? What's all that about?
So my role as chair really is to make sure that the organisation has got the right strategy. Given that the CA is a membership organisation, it's to make sure that the membership body is providing its members with what it needs, essentially. Over the last couple of years, we've probably moved our strategy a little bit. We were very much on the forefront of the future-looking things, so looking at digitisation, the changes of technology within industry. The feedback we got from members was that's great, and they still want us to be involved in that. And we have a lot of sort of cross-government work that we do, but equally they wanted as much information about how they run their business. So we have 4 meetings a year. We have a big conference, which is normally January, February time, and then we have 3 other meetings throughout the year. So we've tried to make our agendas a little bit more split now between that future-looking stuff and also how people run the business, what the immediate issues are around things like recruitment, retention, fees, all the usual things that, we're grappling with in the industry.
Okay, so let's just get to the crux of the matter. How can the sales process be improved? Because transaction times are just absolutely ridiculous. I was doing this, I'm going back 35 years, and I think it's got slower now, and there's more technology, which can't understand how it can get slower when there's more technology. We're better digitally. Um, I also know that you've just come back from a recent trip to Australia, which we're going to discuss. Um, but I'm sitting here. My girlfriend's looking to buy. She's had a property in hand for maybe a while. Um, and she's still waiting. Her solicitor sent over questions and they haven't had a response. And this is like 3 weeks now. I mean, it's crazy. And we wonder why people pull out on sales. So, how can you help estate agents in their process and also sellers and buyers become better educated?
So I do think technology plays its part. I do think that's it. It plays its part, it assists, it can make some processes quicker. I think what's happened over recent years is we've layered much more compliance into the system. So we've got a lot of anti-money laundering checks now. Identity, again, having digital ID and all those things does help. But we have actually, I think, in that front loading part of the process, we've added extra layers, which I think is unhelpful. If I'm being honest, from a conveyancer's point of view, I don't think conveyancers charge enough fees. I think that there's been a race to the bottom over recent years because they're not charging what I believe is the right rate for their professional services. They're having to take on more cases, which means then that each fee earner has got more on their desk. It just takes a longer time for them to get to those additional inquiries and things. So I think you end up with this cycle then because people are overrun, then you lose more people at the industry because they're overwrought with the work. So I generally believe that things like AI are helping and that will speed up the process. But I think it's more a people and a fees and a works of process issue as much as anything, if I'm being honest.
Okay, so I don't think it's any different in a state agency with fees being erased to the bottom with some agents. And I believe that it's worth paying more um, for getting it through quicker. Um, how can are conveyancers starting to understand that they can charge more? Are they charging more? What are they doing to demonstrate their value? Because I look at LinkedIn. And at times, I'll be embarrassed if I'm an estate agent, embarrassed if I'm a mortgage broker, embarrassed if I'm a conveyancer, because they all seem to be having a go at each other. When actually, who's the most important person? The consumer, the person who's buying and selling. And they must think, God, do I really want to sell or do I want to buy? Look at all the industry; they're all at loggerheads with each other.
Yeah, it is a shame because you do see that, and it's not necessarily each of the professions going up against it. It's conveyancer on conveyancer, estate agent on estate agent. We have just got to be more kind to each other, I think. It's all down to communication. As you know, I used to be chair of Property Mark, so I've got a close affinity with estate agents, and I'm a supporter of both estate agents and conveyancers. We've been trying to do some more work and do some webinars in trying to pull conveyancers and estate agents together just to get that better communication. It's difficult, isn't it? Because I can see it from the estate agent's point of view that they need the property to complete because they don't get paid until that completion's happened. A conveyancer's probably thinking, look, I've got all this casework. I'm trying to get to the queries. You keep chasing me. Each time I answer your chasing and progress call, I'm not getting to the casework. But you can understand the estate agent. You saying, yeah, but I need to know what the progress is. I need to update the client. I do think we've got to be kinder to each other and have better communication between all parties, which there are platforms. I know we're going to come on to the Australian system and platforms like PEXA that hopefully will start giving that transparency to some of the parties, at least in that transaction.
Okay, so let's talk about PEXA. Um, what is it? What does PEXA stand for? Because I haven't got a clue. So,
Okay, so PEXA is an Australian company. They started around 15 years ago in Australia. What had happened was the Australian system is run state by state, so across the 5 states, 2 territories. And a couple of the states actually tried to digitise their processes and failed. And the Australian government said, we need a standardised process, we need something that's digital. So they got together with the consortium of banks and they created PEXA. So it's one platform that is used right across the country. However, until I went out more recently, I hadn't understood the complexities that sit behind that because each conveyancing process and each land registry within each of those states all have different rules, regulations, fees. So essentially, you go into the PEXA platform and they do all that for you. Pay one standard fee, regardless of where you are in Australia. And they don't actually give a reduction for bulk transactions either, in the same way that the portals do over here, which I know, looking at LinkedIn, causes lots of problems. And so they are basically a settlement and lodgment platform. So there's about 95% of transactions now go through the PEXA platform. They've just took on Tasmania and the Northern Territory, so they are in all of the states now. As I say, the bit that I was a little bit surprised at is that each state still has a different rules and regulations. I assumed it had all been standardised when PEXA came in, and that's not the case. The other thing that I was also is a myth that I think a lot of people talk to me about is the reason why the Australian digitised system worked so well is because it was mandated across the whole of Australia. That wasn't the case. It was very much state by state. So I met up with the Queensland Chief Land Registrar, for example, and they didn't mandate until they got 80% take up. So PEXA had to do an awful lot in Australia, sending people out to conveyancers' offices, sitting with them, working them through the system to try and get them to adopt it. One of the other myths, I think, with the Australian system as well is that we say they don't have any chains. They don't, but they do ish, if I could say ish. So they do try and work their completion date. So if I was selling a house and buying a house, you would talk to the vendor and talk to your buyer and you agree a date. Most people do try and agree that same completion date. The difference is they're not reliant, each purchase isn't reliant on each other. So if for any reason one falls through, People either just go into rented accommodation or they get a bridging loan. Bridging loans are far more widespread out there. They're a lot cheaper. People aren't scared of them. But equally, there's only a 1% fall through rate out there, and their completion times are within 30 to 60 days. So even if you are taking out a bridging loan or you are going into rental and now you can choose an Airbnb if you wanted to, then you know you're only doing that for a month or 2 months at the very most. So again, there's a bit more of an acceptance around it. So when they say there's no chains, they're not reliant on each other, but people do tend to all move on the same completion date. And it's very rare that one would fall through anyway, because they only have 1% fall through. And most of that probably is because a lot of our fall through rates is because people change their mind, they have a life event, because it's taking 4 to 6 months to complete, something can happen quite radical within that amount of time that can make people pull out. Well, you haven't got that luxury of time in Australia. It happens, and if you've got a life event after, well, you've bought the house, you've just got to deal with it. So there's a few sort of myths that I saw in there, but it is very much state by state. But Australia is such a vast country. I mean, you can fit the map of Europe with inside. So it's a bit like us saying the UK is different to Germany or different to France, I suppose, because it's such a vast country.
So what can us Brits learn and bring in from a system that they're using out there that was speeded up so we're not doing 4 to 6 months?
So I'm not going to promise it's going to vastly speed it up. What it will do is create a lot more transparency, and by the very nature of that, it tends to create speed. And also because so PEXA have come over, they've been doing remortgages in the UK for the last year, and they're about to launch their sale and purchase platform. They've got some road shows. I think there's still some spaces in some of the places that they're doing road shows. I know London's full. So if any estate agents want to go along to them, then please contact PEXA. I'm sure they'd be happy to have you along. So basically, what PEXA is trying to solve is that sort of settlement and lodgment part of the process. So at the moment, you've got conveyancers individually with their client account, money's coming in and out of lenders, and they are then sort of having to disperse at the end of the completion. What happens with PEXA is, so for example, if they've got 1,000 transactions from Nationwide in one day, they will allow Nationwide their slots throughout the day. All the money will come directly from the Nationwide account into the PEXA system, which is built within the Bank of England system. So you would hope would be better protected against fraud. And at the end of the day, then they would just net off the amount and send that back to anything that is owed back to Nationwide. So it keeps it all contained. You haven't got funds moving around in different accounts, which is obviously quicker. There's more certainty in that transaction. One of the biggest things for me is the transparency. So the lenders and the conveyancers can see what is happening in the process. So you haven't got those chase-up calls from lenders. You haven't got the emails. At the end of the process, there is an automatic lodgment with Land Registry, which, as you know, lenders have real trouble with. Conveyancers actually doing their post-completion work and actually protecting their charge, their mortgage at Land Registry. They're also in the process, and it's the next release, I think, but it's coming soon, that they'll also have the ability to send the stamp duty land tax to HMRC. You don't have to do it through that system. If you've got your own provider you want to stay with, that's fine, but that functionality will be there. So essentially, the lender goes in. If there's a lender involved, they'll go in, they'll create a workspace, they'll put in the details. The title deeds will be pulled, so the title register will be pulled from Land Registry. The system will cross-check that the names are correct. Any input, any data that they input, the system checks. So again, hopefully that should reduce requisitions on the post-completion. They will state which conveyancer is acting for the seller and the buyer, and then those two conveyancers will be invited to join the platform. And then all throughout that process, they can see exactly where they are in that process. In the future, it could be that estate agents are brought into it. But you haven't got that same, from an estate agent's point of view, because the lender and the conveyancer can see what's happening on both sides of the transaction. It's going to be much easier for estate agents, because then they're not going to have to be chasing between those two parties all the time and trying to, sort of do that sort of cross-referencing on the information.
Okay, so that's at the end. how can agents really speed up at the beginning?
I mean, there's lots of talk about material information, and I know that there's mixed views on whether that works or doesn't work. The only thing that I can say is the pilots that have been set up and been done over the last 12 months have showed that there's less fall throughs and there are quicker completion times. And you can only, I'm very data driven, I'm not anecdotal. The data does tell you that actually that helps. I know there's been some confusion since the trading standards guidance had been pulled. I believe there's new guidance that's going to be coming out from government. It's still a legal requirement that estate agents and other parties provide material information. So for me, I think if you're not doing it yet, then start doing it. CMA have got new powers. I pretty much think that they'll make an example of somebody, just to make sure that the industry does actually take it on board. And as I say, there'll be new guidance that comes out. So for me, that's one thing that agents can do because the data shows you that it does speed it up.
Okay. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and the lady was buying, and she said she paid for her own searches. So she knew the property she was going to buy through the agent. She then paid for her own searches, did her own searches, and gave it to her solicitor to say, there you go, that's all the searches already done. Can you raise some questions from that? Do you think that should be more commonplace?
That's about as much having sale ready packs, isn't it? It's like going back really, let's face it. Everybody hates saying it, but it's the old hip, isn't it,
Yeah,
essentially? And
bring them back.
well, do you know what? When you talk to people, there's most of the people I talked to say I hated them at the beginning, and just when I got used to them and thought actually these are quite a good idea, they got pulled. And you could argue if you want to stimulate the market, then it sort of makes more sense. The seller's the one that's selling the house, more likely to have equity in it. They're not first-time buyers trying to pull together a deposit and pay for all the other things. So I'm sort of a bit agnostic on whether you bring them back, don't bring them back. But again, certainly the organisations that are doing upfront information and something that looks like sellers packs do seem to have less fall throughs and do seem to have quicker transactions. So there is an argument for it.
I mean, I think what got me earlier was your comment that Australians only have 1% fall through, which is absolutely incredible. Whereas I think the fall through rates here, what a third of properties fall through,
Yeah.
which is crazy. What's your view then, and the conveyancing associations on having some form of like an anti-gazumping tool, a goodwill charter, you know,
Reservation agreement, I think government like to call it, don't they?
reservation agreement. Yep, they were the two words I was looking for.
Before my time, but I did revisit it when we did our last strategy session. We did have a discussion at board level around reservation agreements. It was agreed that in of itself, on its own, it could, a bit like material information on its own, it hasn't got its own worth. But if you start putting all of those things together, you get proper data standards. People start trusting the sharing of data because it's all at the same standards and you know what the data sources are, then they can become quite powerful and quite useful. So I think our diplomatic line at the time was that we are neither for them or against them, but we will keep a watchful eye. I think I think it's just one of those that the devil's in the detail, isn't it? It's how they're brought in and what the terms of that agreement looks like. But you can see where there is a case for them because we do allow people. I mean, I'll hold my hands up. I was trying to buy a house for 7 months. Very embarrassing because at the time I was chair of Property Mark and chair of the CA. And the vendor, after about 6 months, we realised just didn't want to sell. I don't think he wanted to say he didn't want to sell. And so we kept going in this belief that he was going to give us an exchange date. So we couldn't even get an exchange date, let alone a completion date. Now, had we have had some sort of agreement, then I don't think he would have ever strung us along for that amount of time. And that it fell through, not through, our own. We would have loved to have bought the property, but it fell through, and that was 7 months with no mortgage and no chain. yeah, bit embarrassing from my part, given where I'm
Yeah,
from in the industry.
it is a bit crazy, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
when I'm going back to my old Green and Co days, we organised we with our solicitor we had an anti-gazumping tool called a goodwill charter, where we asked both parties to sign. So both parties put down £1,000, and if the seller pulled out because he got more money, or maybe he just got cold feet, that £1,000 will go to you as a buyer. And if a buyer pulled out, apart from bad survey, search, or legal title, then the money will go to the seller. And we
yeah,
found that actually instead of the 3 out of 10 sales falling through, only 1 out of 10 sales fell through because people were committed and they didn't want to lose it. And then actually what's interesting is if you look at new homes do take a reservation agreement. You have to put down a deposit for new homes. So again, why isn't that something that can't be done on, I suppose, just in the housing market full stop?
yeah, exactly. It's creating that commitment, isn't it? So you really do, you know, if you're moving to the next stage, and most people won't want to lose money. Until you make it a monetary thing, people are just losing their time and effort, essentially, aren't they, at the end of the day? So, yeah, there's an argument for them. There is an argument for them.
Okay, so one final question for you. Since you've come back from Australia, is there anything you would suggest agents that should be doing that will at least beat it out slightly that the Aussies are doing well that you saw?
Mm, I think it's about knowing your local market, knowing your conveyancer, really recommending a conveyancer you know is going to deliver a quality service. Don't worry about what they're charging. Most consumers will pay it. If they think they're going to get a quality service and they're going to be dealt with on time, they will pay that fee. So I think if it was me, I'd be creating really good relationships with the conveyancer, having a meeting once a week with them, just say, right, here's all our cases, what's the update, rather than lots of individual calls on different cases. Um, and I would be getting myself really ready for making sure that I was going to be adhering to the material information as well. Interestingly, they're only just bringing in anti-money laundering into Australia. They've been really slow. And I think it's really international pressure, but it is falling on the estate agents to do the bulk of those checks because they're the ones that take the deposit. So it's very different state by state. Some estate agents actually prepare the contract for sale, and others they don't get engaged until after the conveyancers actually created that. But there's a lot at all. I went to a lunch with the Institute of Realtors in Queensland, and they were quite nervous about it. The difference over there is though, whereas we put in a suspicious activity report and we almost sort of stopped the transaction at that point. In Australia, the authorities want the transaction to go through and they want to follow the money. So I think once the estate agents heard they weren't going to lose a sale, they calmed a little bit. It was more around what's the training and what do I have to put in place. But yeah, they're only just bringing in AML checks over there. They do ID with sort of a primary and secondary sort of source, so your passport and then maybe the Medicare cards that they have out there. But again, it's the land registry insist that conveyancers do that face to face. They don't like the idea of digital ID, yet we see that as more secure over here. So
It's interesting because you talk about AML. So the agent has to do an AML check, the mortgage broker has to do an AML check, the solicitor has to do an AML check. And if you look at it as if I'm a buyer or a seller, it's like, hold on a second, I've already given it to the agent, I've already given it to broker, now you're asking me. Surely there's got to be a way that I'm sure you're already doing and speaking to government about, why are we triplicating things?
yeah, it's mad. Well, because they've got this able to start from a blank sheet of paper in Australia, PEXA have created a prototype. It's not completed because the legislation hasn't gone through yet, and obviously they'll have to overlay any final changes to the legislation. But they've actually built in a platform, and there's lots of platforms in the UK that are out there which give you rag status and highlight if there's a transaction they think is a risky transaction. But what they've done is created a platform where the estate agents, the broker, the lender, the conveyancer can all go in. They all see the same information. They might look at it with a different lens, and their follow-on checks might be different, but they're all getting the same data source, and also to a compliance level that they know. It's almost like PEXA's doing their compliance for them. They haven't got to worry about the level that they're doing it to. So they've had the benefit with it all coming in new to be able to build that and create that. I'm sure there's other parties out in Australia that are doing similar sorts of things as well. It's not just PEXA, but we haven't quite got to that point in the UK where we have all of the parties in the transaction going into one space where we see the same data and use that data, as I say, through a different lens, but to make our own decisions about whether we think that activity is suspicious or not. And that's where I think things like the Open Property Data Association, so OPTA, the work they're doing around having data standards and everybody working together to at least get to the same level of compliance and standardisation, it will in the future hopefully make that trust between data sources a little bit more real, because at the moment there's nothing there to say, well, I don't know if I can trust the standard that you're working to. But if you're going into any kind of platform or getting any information where you say actually it's to this standard, it's got to be more trustworthy because you know where the data source is and it's got that stamp of approval on it almost.
Okay, one final question. Sorry, you keep on
All right. I
dragging
think I
to your
did. I went a little bit off piste on the last one, so that's my fault.
okay. Digital logbook.
Yes.
So after post completion, putting everything together, so that everything's there. If somebody decides to sell in 1 year, 5 years, 20 years, makes it all easier. Is that something agents should be looking at doing now, or that's something the conveyancers are looking at doing?
So there are property logbook providers out there, and there is a property logbook association. I looked at this, so I was at Land Registry for 30 years, and the last 10 years I was chief of staff, so I did all the sort of big cross-government projects and looked into all things like this. I actually wanted at the time to create a deregister and put all that extra information so it was part of the Land Register and sort of be a one-stop shop, but that was very blue sky thinking, really. So I do think, particularly once we got rid of land and charge certificates and title packages that everybody used to deposit with the banks, all that information got lost. Because you used to have all that in your little bundle of documents, and then with dematerialisation, it sort of disappeared. So I am an advocate for it. Whether over time, if we get the data sharing right, actually you want stuff in real time, so can you create a logbook that gets updated in real time properly? I don't know, but I do think there definitely is a case. I'd certainly, as a consumer, if I bought a house, I'd quite like the logbook, and then when I came to sell, you haven't got to fish everything out. You might have to update a few things. If you've had some additional planning permission, you might need to upload that into the system. But it does make sense. I think some of that information we lost when we had dematerialisation, it would just be essential repository to have that in. As long as the consumer has the authority over that, and doesn't necessarily matter which provider you're with, you have access to it and within your ability to update that or not. So yeah, I think they are a good idea. Whether in time they get outdated because it's just data. It's this argument over forms and data, isn't it? And is it a logbook? Is it just going to be data sources? Which AI will change. I mean, I look at what's happened with AI over the last 6 months, and it's quite eye-watering really on how quickly it's developing. So who knows what we'll be talking like in another 2 years' time, really.
Okay, one final question, I promise. What are you seeing then, AI that's making a difference on the conveyancing side?
Well, it's been around for a while now, but certainly sort of looking at leases and pulling out the relevant clauses. But it's being used for all sorts of things now, being able to pull from all different sources within CMS systems on additional inquiries, bundling them up, even now giving the draft answer to those inquiries as well, which is very time consuming for conveyancers. That is the one thing that conveyancers have noticed, is there's so much more, and whether that's because we've got less experienced people in the industry now that they tend to raise inquiries, whereas if you're a bit more experienced, you'd sort of know your risk base a little bit better. But I would say, yeah, it's being used in some really clever products now, I think. But yeah, I mean, I see it actually as ripe for land registration. I think if you've got a deed and it's got a standard clause in it and it creates a standard entry on a register, you teach AI all those standardized entries. That's for me, that's perfect. And then you'd have that standardization. And people moan all the time, I get one answer from one land registry and another answer from another. It would standardize that. But then AI is only as good as the input into it, isn't it? And you've just got to make sure that you are inputting the right information into it for it to give you the right answer. Because how many times do people say, I'll put something into ChatGPT and it told me the wrong answer? Well, that's because whoever's fed that in has misinterpreted or put the wrong thing in.
So should I, as an agent, be asking conveyancers if they're using AI to speed up their transactions?
Yeah, you could ask them. So there are organisations out there like Orbital. There used to be Orbital Witness. A lot of conveyancers are using their products, which have got AI in there. I know. What are the other two? There's the other two that are doing additional inquiries. Peter Ambrose, Legalito, and collaborative conveyancing. They're using a lot of AI to help conveyancers pull together their additional inquiries and answer them as well. I'm sure there's others. I probably offended some companies somewhere with not mentioning them, but there are companies out there that are using it successfully and are being able to at least cut down that upfront research and investigation. Conveyancers are still looking at that information and verifying it, but it's just that initial upfront time and effort that it's saving on, and it does make a big difference if you're doing that on each case.
Yeah. Well, look, I promise you that was my final question, so you're okay.
I think we could talk all
If
afternoon if we were left.
if people want to get hold of you, Nikki, how do they do that, please?
Yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best place if they want to contact me on there, or via the Conveyancing Association, either to direct to myself or, but probably LinkedIn's probably the easiest because I'll pick up the messages in there quickly.
Yeah. Well, look, thanks very much for being a guest. It's really fascinating and interesting subject. So, everybody, thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. Bye.